guys, so in my previous videos in this playlist, I explained the concepts of tonal harmony and modal harmony. I defined tonal harmony as using major or minor keys, using functional harmony, and having a tonal center. So that you have chord progressions that sound like this. And I defined modal harmony as using all of the available modes, having a non-functional harmony, but still having a tonal center. So then you get chord progressions which sound like this. Now in tonality, which uses a functional harmony, there is a strong pull towards the tonic. The dominant chord, like G7, wants to resolve down a fifth to the tonic, C major 7. In modality, however, because there is no functional harmony, there isn't as strong a pull back to the tonic. However, because there still is a tonic, there still is a tonal center, there is still some tendency to want to resolve to that tonic. Now it's nowhere near as strong as in functional harmony, but it's still there. As long as you have a tonic chord or a root note or a tonal center, there will always be some tendency to want to resolve to that tonic, no matter how weak. Now this is because by definition, a tonic chord always feels completely resolved, completely at rest with no tension. It feels like home. This means that all the other chords are heard in relation to this tonic chord and therefore have some level of tension that feels like it wants to resolve back to the tonic. Now in modal harmony, I said that you constantly need to reinforce the root note in order to establish a tonal center. Right, I'm hitting that D over and over again in order to indicate that I'm in the key of D Dorian. But what happens if you stop reinforcing the root note and thus lose your tonal center? Now I'm going to call this Pandiatonicism. Now, Pandiatonicism is a much wider concept, and all it really means is using the diatonic scale in a non-functional, non-traditional way. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to say that Pandiatonicism means using a generic but diatonic key, using non-functional harmony, and not having a tonal center. Now, it's a horrible word, but there is some logic to it. The word pan means all, and the word diatonic means key or within the scale. So Pandiatonicism means we're playing with all the notes of the scale or within all the keys in that scale. And Pandiatonicism is a kind of in-between step between modality and atonality. So essentially, you're still using notes from a single diatonic scale, for example C major, but you're using them without functional harmony and without a tonal center. So the chords and the melody and the sounds that you're hearing are still very familiar because you're still using that very recognizable diatonic scale, but you don't have a tonal center, so there's no reference point. And without a reference point, you just get lost in this soup of diatonic chords. So with tonal harmony and modal harmony, because there is still a root note or a tonal center or a tonic chord, there is still some tendency to resolve back to that tonic chord. However, with Pandiatonicism, because we've gotten rid of the tonal center, there is absolutely no tendency to resolve anywhere. So all chords are now literally equal. No chord has a tendency to move to any other chord. You can use any diatonic chord you want in any order. And you can use chords built in thirds as well as chords built in fourths, but generally in modern jazz we use chords built in fourths or quartal chords. So using this idea, you can get something like this. that sounds really unnerving because there is no tonal center and there's no functional harmony, so there's never any resolution. They're just individual chords floating around in some harmonic soup without any kind of reference to one another. Now, in practice, most modal jazz songs do have a key or a root note or a tonal center. However, you might find sections of a modal song that sound pandiatonic, that sound like they don't have a tonal center. And so you just sort of get completely lost in the chords and the melody and completely lose that reference point of the tonic. Now, another name for tonal center is pitch centricity. And the reason that exists is to avoid using the word tonal when talking about some kind of key having a tonal center. Because generally when someone talks about tonal harmony, they really mean functional harmony. So if you wanted to be really strict, you could call tonal harmony pitch-centric functionality, modal harmony pitch-centric modality, Pandiatonicism, the way I've explained it in this video, as non-pitch centric modality, and atonality, which I'll cover in a future video, as non-pitch centric chromaticism. So the first three use diatonic scales, whereas the last one uses the chromatic scale, or a non-diatonic scale. Cool, so hopefully that shows you that songs don't necessarily have to have a tonal center or a tonic chord. And in fact, there is a bit of modern jazz out there that does not use tonal centers. But as I said, there'll be more of that when I cover atonality. So that's it for me for the moment. Thanks for watching, and feel free to leave any questions or comments. See ya!